Hey, good morning. So in Romans 1:29, and so what happens to the human heart when it turns away from God? So let's read Romans 1:29 together. They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips. So Romans 1:29 gives us one of the most sobering answers in all of Scripture. Paul just doesn't describe a few scattered sins. He paints this picture of a life filled, saturated, overflowing with corruption. So this verse shows the collapse of the soul disconnected from God. This is kind of like we've been talking about what happens when people don't recognize God. And here's like he's kind of crescendoing to the result of it. So Paul begins with the phrase being filled with unrighteousness. So this Greek word, I won't butcher it for you. It's kind of long, but they call it the perfect passive participle. This means that it's not a momentary lapse. It's a settled condition. So humanity becomes filled, saturated, permeated with sin because it simply rejected the knowledge of God. Now, all unrighteousness sets the tone for everything that follows. It's this broad category, the umbrella under which every sin grows. So when the heart pushes God out, it doesn't stay empty. It fills with something else. So then Paul begins listing the fruit of that inward corruption. He says people are filled with wickedness. This is intentional active evil. This isn't accidental wrongdoing. It's deliberate. It's the kind of evil Jesus said comes from the heart in Mark 17:21-23. So it's the kind of evil associated with the enemy, with Satan himself. So when truth is rejected, wickedness becomes the new normal. So next, Paul names covetousness, the insatiable desire to have more. So this covetousness is never satisfied. It drives exploitation, jealousy, theft, adultery, violence. It's wanting something that's not yours. So Paul calls it idolatry. Colossians 3:5 says it replaces God with desire. So when the heart is empty of God, it becomes full of craving, but of something else, not of God. So then Paul says humanity is filled with maliciousness, depravity, badness in its essence. So this is inward rot. It's corruption of the heart that produces the corruption of life. So Titus 3:3 describes people living in malice and envy, showing how these sins feed on each other. Maliciousness is the soil in which the relational destruction grows. So after describing this inward condition, Paul shifts to the outward expression. He says people are full of envy. Envy is resentment at someone else's blessing. You know anybody like that? It's the opposite of love. Proverbs 14:30 says, envy rots the bones. It destroys relationships, families, churches, communities. When the heart rejects God, it cannot rejoice in the good of others. So from envy comes murder. Murder is hatred matured. So first envy grows, then hatred grows, and then eventually violence erupts. So 1 John 3:15 says hatred is murder in seed form. When God is rejected, life loses its value. So then Paul names strife, contention, rivalry, conflict. Strife is what happens when self becomes the center. Proverbs 13:10 says, pride produces contention. James 4:1 says, wars and fightings come from desires within. Strife is the natural result of a heart disconnected from God's peace. Next is deceit, trickery, treachery, baiting. Deceit is the language of the serpent. In Genesis 3, right? It manipulates, it twists, it destroys trust. When truth is rejected, lies become a lifestyle. So then Paul lists malignity, an evil disposition, ill-natured spirit. This is the person who assumes the worst, interprets everything negatively, and delights in harm. It's the opposite of grace, mercy, and goodwill. So malignity poisons relationships and communities, churches, families. Finally, Paul names whisperers, secret slanderers, right? Whispering is a quiet sin, but it's a deadly one. Proverbs 16:28 says, a whisperer separates close friends. Whispering destroys reputations from the shadows. It's the fruit of envy, pride, and malice. So when you step back and look at the structure of Romans 1:29, you see a progression. It begins with inward corruption, unrighteousness, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness. Then it moves to relational corruption, envy, murder, strife. Then it ends with verbal corruption, deceit, malignity, whispering. The heart, the hands, the tongue, all affected. This is the complete collapse of life disconnected from God. But there's hope. The gospel doesn't just forgive sins, it transforms the heart. Where sin fills, Christ cleanses. Where envy rots, Christ renews. Where strife divides, Christ reconciles. Where deceit destroys, Christ restores. Where whispering wounds, Christ heals. So Romans 1:29 is a warning, but it's also a reminder of what Christ saves us from. Without him, we're filled with darkness. With him, we are filled with the Spirit. Without him, we overflow with corruption. With him, we overflow with love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So as you reflect on Romans 1:29, let it drive you to gratitude. Let it remind you of the power of the gospel, and let it call you to walk in the Spirit so that your life is filled, not with darkness of Romans 1, but with the light of Christ. That's it for today. Like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and have a great day. God bless.